everyone. Welcome to our weekly Living Well series. I'm Tara Parker Pope, founding editor of Well, the Times Consumer Health section. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Robert Lustig, who is an endocrinologist and the author of Fat Chance, Beating the Odds Against Sugar, Processed Food, Obesity and Disease. He has another book coming up we're going to tell you about. Welcome, Robert.
Thanks so much for having me, Tara.
Actually, I don't call you Robert. I call you Dr. Lustig.
No, it's Rob.
I can't, sorry.
I'm not your doctor. It's okay.
Hello to everyone listening. You can submit your questions for us using the Q&A feature in Zoom. I hope you guys will participate. Dr. Lustig can answer just all your questions if you're a little confused about sugar, fruit, processed foods, just pandemic snacking. He's here for you. So take this opportunity and send us your questions. We will get as many in as we can. Please remember always this event is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please reach out to your doctor, a professional health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. And know that this event is also being recorded. So let's get started. So Dr. Lustig, how are you? How are you surviving pandemic life?
I'm holed up in my house in San Francisco. I'm just, squirreled away and writing.
Yeah, that's San Francisco's doing pretty well, but you have a lot of strict rules there still too, right?
Yeah, no, I'm very proud of my mayor and my governor because they, sheltered in place very early and kept the rates down. In fact, my zip code has the lowest infectivity rate of virtually any place in the country. So, and we're very good at mask wearing over here.
Yeah, wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. I agree. New York is hanging in there. We're doing pretty well now, even though we had a really rough patch. And sadly, much of the country didn't learn a lot from us, but they should have, and hopefully they will soon. So, we've been talking a lot on this program about coronavirus, about the pandemic, and now we're kind of shifting gears to talk about sugar and processed foods. But you pointed out to me earlier that there's a relationship between how we're eating and living our lives and coronavirus. You want to share that thought with us?
Absolutely. So if you take a look globally at where the pandemic has struck and who the pandemic has struck, not in terms so much of infectivity, but in terms of mortality. Okay, there are four main demographics. One is the elderly. We all understand that. And there are very specific reasons for the elderly having to do with, baseline pulmonary function and, immune system problems, that happen when you get older. But if you look at the other three demographics, we're talking people of color, obesity, and pre-existing conditions, diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, fatty liver disease, basically the diseases of metabolic syndrome. Those three demographics, what do they share in common? One thing, processed food. Now, the question is, how could processed food, which we know causes chronic disease, the diseases of metabolic syndrome, how could that lead to increased mortality from an acute disease? And the answer is three ways. First way, through insulin resistance. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about this protein on the coronavirus spike that is like the injector point for the RNA to enter the cell. Well, it has to bind to a protein on our cells. That protein is called ACE2. And it's an endocrine receptor, angiotensin converting enzyme 2, something I take care of. It's on all of our water transfer cells. And that includes blood vessels and the brain, which explains why these different organs get affected. That ACE2 is regulated by insulin. And the higher your insulin levels, the higher your ACE2, which means the more portals that virus has to infect you. And so you end up having to deal with a bigger viral burden and a bigger load, and therefore increased risk for mortality because of your insulin resistance, because of your processed food habit. That's number one. Number two, the fiber in our food is converted in our intestines to a chemical called butyrate. And butyrate is a short chain fatty acid, which has been shown to, number one, suppress insulin, and number two, be anti-inflammatory. And it's been shown that low butyrate levels correlate with increased morbidity and mortality as well. So lack of fiber in our food, and that's processed food. puts you at risk as well. And then the third way is diabetes itself. The higher your blood glucose, the more it seems that those portals stay open and therefore allow for more infectivity of the virus as well. So high blood glucose, again, a disease of processed food. I have actually said what we should be doing is rebranding type 2 diabetes as processed food disease, because that's what it is. So all of those together basically, put us all at risk. And we're eating more processed food under the pandemic than ever before.
We are getting a ton of questions, so let me just get a couple definitions out of the way. First off, when you talk about ACE2, I don't want to scare people who are taking blood pressure medications. This enzyme is a good actor in many ways in the body. It serves a purpose. I don't want people to think that if they're taking a blood pressure drug that affects ACE2 that they should stop taking it. I want to just quickly clarify that for people.
Sure. So there is a medicine that affects that ACE2. They're called ARBs, angiotensin receptor blockers. They've actually looked at that question as to whether or not ARBs either make COVID worse or protect you from COVID. And the answer is it doesn't appear that it doesn't either. And absolutely, if you are on a blood pressure medicine, you need to stay on your blood pressure medicine.
Right.
So this is a water issue more than a blood pressure issue.
It's a common question we get, so I just wanted to clear that up for people. Now let's talk very quickly, because I want to get to these questions about how do you define processed food?
Well, it depends. I mean, there are different definitions out there. There's the food industry definition, okay, which has to do with macronutrients coming from different sources, recombined, refined in various ways. Things that lead to consistency of quality and taste across countries. Those are the food engineering definitions. From a nutrition standpoint, processed food has 3 things too little and 8 things too much. So I'm just going to name them super quick. Yeah. Too little fiber, too little omega-3s, too little micronutrients, and then too much branched chain amino acids, too much salt, too much nitrates, too much omega-6 fatty acids, too much food dyes, too many food additives, too many emulsifiers, too many nitrates, and finally, the big kahuna, too much sugar. And sugar is, is the 2,000-pound gorilla in processed food. And if we could cut down our sugar consumption, the other 7 wouldn't be nearly as dangerous. Right.
So that's why that was my next question. We talked to you a lot about sugar, but today we're also talking about processed food. But those 2 problems really go together. They're really part of the same problem, right?
Absolutely. Sugar is the marker for processed food because 62% of the sugar that we consume each day is in processed foods, and 74% of the items in the grocery store are spiked with added sugar specifically to get us to buy more for the food industry's purposes, not for us.
And one thing we talked about earlier this year when we were talking about making 2020 the year of less sugar, those were simpler times. You made the point to me that this isn't just about weight loss, that a healthy, fit, thin person who doesn't have any weight issues should still be concerned about sugar. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the first issue is people have to understand this is not about calories and it is not about obesity. Thin people get sick too. Okay, it's a disease called TOFI, T-O-F-I, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. Real medical term, 1,500 Medline citations. And so everyone is at risk. And it turns out 40% of the normal weight population have the exact same diseases as do the obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease. Now, it's true they don't get it at the same rate, 40% versus 80%. So I agree, obesity is a complicating factor. I don't argue that. But if thin people get it too, how can it be about calories? How can it be about obesity? In fact, we know that a calorie is not a calorie. Different calories are metabolized differently in the body. That's what my book, Fat Chance, was about. And that will be made even more clear in my new book, which we'll talk about a little later. The bottom line is everyone is at risk. and it has to do with what you eat. This is not an obesity problem.
And tell me again why sugar is so toxic. I know you've got a 90-minute lecture on this. You can possibly do it.
I'll do it in 3 sentences.
Okay.
There are 3 things that sugar, and specifically the molecule fructose, does. And fructose is found specifically in sucrose, cane, table sugar, you know, the stuff you put in your coffee, high fructose corn syrup, maple syrup, honey, and agave. Okay, 5 caloric sweeteners, half fructose basically. So they're all the same in that respect. 3 things. Number 1, liver fat. Fructose goes straight to the liver, and any excess gets turned into liver fat, and that liver fat precipitates in the liver and causes the liver to not work well. When the liver doesn't work well, the pancreas has to make more insulin, and that drives insulin levels all over the body, which drive chronic disease and weight gain. That's number 1. Number 2, fructose drives the aging reaction. The reason banana's brown, the reason we paint barbecue sauce on our ribs, the reason we get cataracts, the reason we get wrinkles. This is a reaction called the Maillard or the browning reaction. So it's occurring all the time. You can't stop it. It is a phenomenon associated with life. The question is, how fast does it occur? And fructose makes it run 7 times faster. So basically, you accumulate 7 times the amount of oxygen radicals, which then cause damage. And then finally, number 3, fructose stimulates the reward center. Glucose doesn't. So fructose is, in the extreme, addictive. And based on its analogy with alcohol, we estimate that 20% of America is addicted to sugar. So, you know, you put those 3 things together, liver fat, aging reaction, addiction, and you have the reason why sugar is so heinous.
You make a very convincing case, especially the whole barbecued ribs analogy and the wrinkles, and it's all very, very frightening. You know, we're getting a lot of questions, and I think this next question really leads into what you just talked about. Fresh fruit has a lot of natural sugar. It has fructose. Is there any problem eating lots of fruit in my diet if I have no health issues to worry about? So this is a big source of confusion. Sugar in fruit versus sugar in processed foods.
Understood. And everyone asks that question.
Yeah.
The answer is the sugar in fruit is exactly the same sugar as in Pop-Tarts. Okay? There's no difference between the chemical itself. The difference is the fiber. The fiber is the protector. And the reason is because the fiber keeps the sugar from being absorbed. The fiber in the fruit, and there are 2 kinds, and you need both, soluble and insoluble. So insoluble fiber forms like a fishnet, okay, inside the duodenum in the first part of the intestine. And then the soluble fiber are little globules, and they plug the holes in the fishnet, like getting kelp caught in the fishnet. Okay? And between the 2 of them, you end up reducing the rate of absorption of sugars from the duodenum, from the gut, into the portal veins so that your liver is protected. And this is all about protecting your liver. And what fiber does is it keeps your liver safe. And if you don't absorb it early, that means more of what you ate will go further down the intestine to the next part called the jejunum. And that's where the bacteria live, the microbiome. And the microbiome is, they eat 30% of what you consume. So even though you ate it, you never got it because your bacteria metabolized it instead of you. So even though it passed your lips and registered as calories, in fact, if you didn't absorb it, who cares? And you have to feed your gut. And I will tell you that the definition of healthy, and I don't care what the USDA says, and I don't care what the FDA says, here's the definition of healthy, okay? Protect the liver, feed the gut. 6 words, 2 principles, 6 words. Michael Pollan said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. There's something wrong with every single one of those clauses. This actually works. And fruit, because of its fiber, both protects the liver and feeds the gut. So fruit's okay, but fruit juice because it's been strained, because the fiber is gone, even if you put it in a Breville or a Vitamix and you turn it into a smoothie, you have destroyed the insoluble fiber. You have sheared it to smithereens. And therefore now it is just like orange juice.
Now, two quick thoughts on that. I missed what you said. So I understand that the fiber is preventing our body from absorbing all that sugar.
Correct.
What's feeding the microbiome? Is the fiber feeding the microbiome or the sugar feeding the microbiome?
Both. So the sugar's feeding the upper intestine microbiome, and the fiber is feeding the colonic microbiome. That's where the butyrate gets made. So in fact, they're both feeding it. Yes. And as long as you don't absorb the sugar, then your liver doesn't care. Okay?
I see. So the fruit is allowing that sugar, instead of being absorbed and hurting my liver, the fiber in the fruit is allowing the sugar to go and feed the healthy bacteria in my body.
Right. So when you consume a piece of fruit, you're not feeding you, you're feeding your bacteria, which is a good thing.
Now I have to ask you about the smoothie. We had a conversation about smoothies on the hierarchy of bad things and good things. Fruit juice, not good for you. It's pretty much just sugar. Better to eat the whole fruit. And I ask you at this point, in an ice cream emergency, if I'm just craving a snack and I want, some whole yogurt, no sugar, some frozen fruit, how bad is that for me to make a smoothie? And you said it's like not as bad as juice, but not as good as the whole fruit.
Right, exactly. And the reason is because the fiber in the fruit does 6 things. And if you smoothie it, you've lost 2. It still does the other 4. It increases rate of transit, so you'll get the satiety signal sooner. It still will allow the colonic bacteria to make butyrate, so you will still get the anti-inflammatory effect. Okay. There are several things that even after you've smoothied it, you can still get the benefit of. But the big one, that reduction in rate of absorption from the duodenum to the liver, that you will have lost. And that means that your glucose and your fructose spike in your bloodstream will go sky high, which means that your insulin will go sky high, which means you will still drive chronic disease. So it's better than soda, but not by much.
All right. That answer always depresses me, and it never changes. I keep trying to get.
Sorry. The data are the data. The science is the science.
Okay, so this viewer asked kind of an interesting question about, balancing the foods we eat with, the good and the bad. So she says, I have enjoyed making and drinking, is it kombucha? But despite the probiotics, it's still not a great thing fructose-wise. What are your thoughts? So she's, I'm getting probiotics, but I'm also getting sugar.
Right. So here's a question. We got a whole bunch of probiotics out there. We got probiotic pills, we got yogurt, we got kimchi, we got kombucha, we got, fermented fish, we got all sorts of things, okay, that are fermented. And fermented is good, and I'm not suggesting it's not. And fermented has probiotics, and that is good. But here's the question. Why do you have to keep taking them? The whole reason for probiotics is to try to repopulate good species of bacteria in your gut. Why do you have to keep taking it? If you took it once, they should be able to set up shop, grow, and increase microbial diversity in a good way, and therefore improve metabolic health and GI health. And if they took, and if they grew, that would be true. And you'd only have to take it once, but you don't. You have to keep taking it. And that's the issue. Why do you have to keep taking it? And the answer is because the environment in your intestine is so screwed up from the rest of the food you eat that that's why they died in the first place. So you can try to keep repopulating, but if you don't have an intestinal environment that allows for those bacteria to take hold and grow and to battle back the bad bacteria that don't care, then it doesn't really matter. You're still behind the 8 ball and you're not going to get better. So what you really need is not a probiotic. What you really need is a prebiotic. Okay? That is that which changes the intestinal environment to let the good bacteria grow. And the prebiotic of choice, the one that works consistently and in 2 days, is dietary fiber. Dietary fiber will change the microbiome in 2 days flat. And my colleagues at UCSF showed this.
So wait, so in 2 days after consuming how much fiber?
Well, so that's a good question. The USDA says we should be consuming 25 grams of fiber. Our current median fiber consumption for the United States is 12. The fact is 25 is actually too low. It probably should be 50. And our ancestors, based on fossil records and DNA analysis of fecal material from way back when, it suggests that our ancestors consumed 100 grams of fiber a day. The point is, back then, we used to feed our bacteria. Now we don't. And until we do feed our bacteria, we're going to continue to have problems. And the only thing in our current grocery store that feeds our bacteria is real food, fiber-containing food, food that hasn't been processed.
So how would I get the right amount of fiber in a day of eating? What foods could I add that would make sure of that?
Well, anything that's on the outside of the, on the edges of the grocery store, anything in the produce aisle. However, if it's on a shelf in the middle of the store, then what's happened is that fiber has been processed either out or actually been changed in such a way as to render it inactive for this purpose. So basically anything that came out of the ground will work, as long as it hasn't been tainted, as long as it hasn't been processed. And the way you know that is because it doesn't have a food label.
Right. And
so
how
much? It's a food label, it's a warning label.
Food labels are warning labels. You always come up with these great little things to remember. How much fruit, what's the recommendation on fruit and vegetables? I've seen 5 servings, I've seen 10 servings. Yeah. What's the right amount for feeding our?
If it's whole fruit and whole vegetables, that, you can cook them, but as long as you haven't destroyed them in any other meaningful way, I would say that if you are getting about 25 grams, and usually it's a 1 to 10 ratio of fiber to calories. So I would say that if you're consuming anywhere from 250 calories in fiber-containing foods, so basically a side dish with each meal, you're in great shape.
So if I do nothing else but just step up my fruit and vegetable consumption, just double it, amp it up, am I doing something good for my health if I just increase that?
Yes, you are, but the thing is that if you're still eating processed food and you're still drinking the Coke and eating the Doritos and the French fries and the Oreo cookies, even though you think you're vegan, the fact of the matter is you're not protecting your liver the way you think you are. Okay. And you're still ending up causing metabolic dysfunction. So the fiber is good, but it's not enough alone. And the same is true of exercise. The exercise is good, but it's not enough alone.
Right.
There are 8 subcellular pathologies, things that are going on inside the cell that contribute to metabolic disease. They're not ICD-9 codes, they're not diseases themselves, but they are the things that drive chronic disease. And I'll name them all 8. Ready? Glycation, that is when a glucose binds to a protein, that Maillard reaction. Oxidative stress, okay, which has to do with whether oxygen radicals are released. Mitochondrial dysfunction, whether your mitochondria are processing all the way to carbon dioxide or not. Insulin resistance, which we talked about. Membrane instability, which has to do with how distensible membranes are, which is a big issue in terms of polyunsaturates and omega-3s. Inflammation, which comes from various adipose tissue depots. Methylation, which has to do with whether or not the DNA markers on the outside of the chromosomes have been changed. And lastly, autophagy, which is clearing out dead cells and dead debris. You could call it garbage night at the cellular level. Those 8 things are what cause metabolic disease. Exercise helps 5 of them. It doesn't help all 8. There are still 3 that exercise will not touch. So exercise is great, and I am totally for it. But if you think you can outrun a bad diet, you better think again.
Okay. And real quick, you mentioned, what did you say, ICD-9 codes? Those are when a doctor is like sending your information to the insurance company, it has to have a code, right?
That's right. They're the billing codes that tell the insurance company, pay me.
Yeah, just in case that confused somebody. It's not an actual diagnosis, but these are the 8 things that can go wrong in your body. There's no insurance reimbursement for diagnosing these problems, but you can solve them with a combination of exercise and healthy eating.
That's right.
All right. Let's do a few more questions. Janet asks, what are your thoughts on sugar substitutes like stevia, monk fruit, or even honey? Now, I think we've got two categories here. We've got sort of sugar substitutes with calories and no calorie sugar substitutes. So can you talk about both of those?
Sure. So sugar substitutes with calories, basically, we're talking about the same things. It's still an issue because it's still going to the liver. It's still going to be processed by the mitochondria.
So honey, monk fruit, what else?
Agave, maple syrup, but basically it doesn't matter. It's still fructose, it's still a problem. And, people say, oh yeah, but what about the probiotics and the other nutraceuticals in honey? I'm telling you, no one has shown any benefit from those in any meaningful study. Okay, only the ones from the honey industry. So, it's gram for gram, ounce for ounce, calorie for calorie, it's all the same. Now, the artificial sweeteners, everyone wants to know, well, if I can't sweeten with sugar, why can't I use artificial sweeteners? And the answer is, well, you can. The question is it okay? That's a complicated question. And what a recent paper that came out in Lancet argues that the toxicity of one Coca-Cola equals the toxicity of 2 diet Coca-Colas. So it's half as bad. Now you say, well, wait, but it's got no calories, it's got no fructose. How could it be half as bad? Right.
Yeah.
That's the question. So there are a couple of things you need to know. Number one, even though it doesn't have calories, the sweet on the tongue still tells the brain sugar's coming. And so you still release extra insulin, and that extra insulin still drives weight gain and chronic disease, just at a lower level, but it still does. So that's number one. Number two, those artificial sweeteners have been shown to alter the intestinal microbiome and lead to leaky gut and glucose intolerance, which drive inflammation and therefore metabolic syndrome itself. Number three, adipose tissue cells have receptors for some of those artificial sweeteners. So it might be that if those artificial sweeteners are getting into the bloodstream, they are actually driving those adipose tissues to take up extra energy anyway, even though they're non-caloric. So there are a bunch of reasons to be very concerned about artificial sweeteners having nothing to do with fructose and having nothing to do with calories. It's best to de-sweeten your diet. And the way I argue it is, sugar should be safe and rare. If you have dessert once a week, make it a damn good one. Okay, I am for dessert. Okay, got that, New York Times? I am for dessert. For dessert. I am not for dessert for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. And if 74% of the food items in the grocery store have been spiked with added sugar, that means we're eating dessert at every single meal and in between as well. And that's the problem, not the once a week cheesecake, which, is my passion. Let me at a Junior's and I'll show you what dessert looks like.
Well, that's good to hear. So you're not saying we just need to suffer the rest of our lives without anything, no more ice cream, no more pie, no more cake. You're just saying once a week.
Look, sugar is reward. Okay, reward yourself. Now, do you need to reward yourself at every meal? Then it's not reward, is it?
Right. Okay, so that's going to lead into some of these questions where Michelle asks, can you please give me some concrete ways to wean myself off sugar? This is what's so hard, is that I think there's a lot that lurks there that we don't know. And we're also surprised, should we start with breakfast, lunch, dinner? How do you...
Right. This is a complicated question, and different people have, ultimately different answers. Here's what we know. There are a lot of people in this world who say, oh, I have a horrible sweet tooth. That is sugar addiction. Now, if you look at alcohol addiction as a template, 40% of America are teetotalers, don't touch the stuff. 40% are social drinkers. You pick up a beer, put it down. I'm in that category. 20% have a problem with alcohol, and 10% are hardcore alcoholics. That's what the alcohol literature shows us. I actually think sugar is about the same, and the reason is because sugar and alcohol are metabolized the same way. In fact, your liver can't tell the difference, and your reward system can't tell the difference between the two. So I think that there's a good case to be made for how one deals with alcohol in terms of how one deals with sugar. Now, how can you wean yourself off alcohol? Well, there are low alcohol beers. Well, there are low sugar substitutes, and there are low sugar foods that you can use. In addition, uh, the withdrawal symptoms of alcohol are much more severe than the withdrawal symptoms of sugar. But if you know that they are going to exist, and you know that they will only last 5 days, you can make it through. That understanding that if you are sugar addicted and you go sugar free for 5 days, you will come out the other end with a clearer mind, with without the hankering for sugar, and you will see that you will start eating less and you will start losing weight because your insulin resistance will have improved. And so your reward system will come back online appropriately as opposed to having been doused with it. So the knowledge alone will help. And then you can use various low sugar alternatives, like for instance, diet sweeteners. The only thing is that diet sweeteners are not meant to be a substitute. They're really meant to be a wean, kind of like methadone for heroin addiction. You don't stay on methadone, you wean off it, at least if you have a good public health worker.
So the first week, the first 2 weeks, use sugar substitutes to try to wean myself off sugar. What about, how much weaning should there be? Should it just be kind of more cold turkey? Like if I'm eating cereal or pastries for breakfast, and do I switch to eggs and bacon? Do I switch?
You do. Absolutely. You switch to eggs and bacon. And eggs and bacon
have a hard time with that.
Eggs and bacon are extraordinarily satiating. Plus, eggs and bacon have lots of tryptophan. And tryptophan is probably the the amino acid, which is converted into serotonin, is probably deficient in your brain and in your gut. And is probably telling your brain, I need more food. So if you hit it with extra tryptophan, you are likely to turn it into extra serotonin, which will actually placate you, because serotonin is the contentment neurotransmitter, the happiness neurotransmitter. And so, yes, you hit it with eggs and bacon with all you got.
Okay, so a protein-based breakfast instead of a carby, sugary breakfast.
Absolutely.
Now, let's talk about lunch and dinner and the kind of foods, like where is the sugar coming into my diet at lunch and dinner?
Well, Chinese chicken salad is dessert, okay? And you have to look at it as such. The fact of the matter is virtually all the foods that we eat that are processed, that are made by someone else, means that they have added sugar on purpose because they know that it covers up the other 4 tastes on your tongue. It covers up salty, like honey roasted peanuts. It covers up umami, okay, like sweet and sour pork. It covers up bitter, like milk chocolate, and it covers up sour, okay, like lemonade, and So the fact of the matter is, the food industry uses sugar as its draw because it can make dog poop taste good.
Ew.
If you add enough, and that's what they do. Okay. Yeah. A perfect example of this is if you just go to the store and you look at a jar of tomato sauce. Okay, yes, tomatoes are the first ingredient. What's the second ingredient?
Is it sugar?
Sugar. Why? Because they use immature tomatoes in the production of the tomato sauce. If they were mature tomatoes, they'd sell them as tomatoes. They make much more money off of them. So they have to process them. But the fact is, because they're immature, they have a lot of citric acid. And citric acid, as you know, basically goes to vinegar. Okay, so it is bitter, it is pungent, it's not very pleasant, in tasting in your tomato sauce. So if you add some sugar, you can cut that. And people in the wine business talk about the sugar to acid ratio all the time, because that's the way they get over it. That's why German wines are sweet, is because they don't get as much sun, so therefore they have a lot of citric acid, so therefore they have to cut it with fruit juice in order to be able to make it drinkable. So if you go to the store,
got juice in it?
Sorry?
You know what the Gewürztraminer is? Like if I drink a German sweet wine, that's just juice?
Certainly a Spätlese or a Cabernet, it still has sugar in it. And Gewürztraminer has a little bit of sugar still in it too. Depends if it's an American or a German Gewürztraminer.
Well, that
leads, are good.
That leads into an important question. I think a lot of people, when they're talking about cutting sugar, they worry, they enjoy a cocktail, they enjoy an alcoholic beverage in the evening. If we have the occasional drink, a listener asks, what is the best choice? If we're limiting sugar, should we try to give up alcohol? What's your advice about, in this larger plan of eliminating sugar and processed food from my diet, where does alcohol fit in, and what choices should I make?
It's very simple. If you want an alcoholic drink, have an alcoholic drink. An alcoholic drink. It's called one.
Fine.
If you need an alcoholic drink, that's a different story. Okay, there's a difference between wanting one and needing one. If you want one, then you should have one. And if you need more than one, then there's something else going on. Okay, there's an addiction phenomenon going on. In which case, sugar, by maintaining that reward system, continues that craving. And all you have to do is go to an AA meeting. And after the AA meeting's over, what do they have at the little, get together afterwards?
Cookies.
Rock stars, brownies, cookies, etc. Why do you think that is? Even coffee. Why do you think that is? Because all they've done is addiction transfer. Yes, they've transferred their addiction from something dangerous like alcohol, which is health a health problem and a public health problem, to something that is at least a little bit more, shall we say, socially acceptable.
But what about in choosing the alcoholic beverage? Someone like me, I like the drinks that like a 6-year-old would like, the sweet cocktail, like a margarita, or I definitely prefer a sweet cocktail. So should I try to maybe move from a sweet cocktail to maybe just a glass of wine?
Why does a margarita have to be sweet, Tara?
Well, I'm just saying that's how they're made.
I make margaritas without any sugar. I don't add any agave nectar to mine. Okay? I have some tequila, and I have some triple sec, and I have some lime juice. Okay, and I'll have a margarita just like anyone else. Okay, in fact, I'm having taco salad for dinner tonight. I will likely make a margarita to go with it, and it's fine because I have one, about one a week.
So tell me about that taco salad. How are you avoiding processed food in that taco salad?
Buy everything on the edge of the supermarket.
How are you?
That's true. I can't do that. I can't do that with the pinto beans. So I check the pinto beans for added sugar. So I make sure that I get a no sugar pinto bean. Everything else is from the outside of the from the produce aisle.
That leads into the next question. Veronica asked, what about canned goods like chickpeas that are canned? Are those considered processed foods? So can you guide us through the canned food aisle?
Sure. So canned foods, I would say, are minimally processed. For the most part, they're okay. However, some have added sugar. Very specifically, they will say for curing and also as a preservative. Also, the big issue is bread. People think, the bread in the bread aisle is okay. Now, I will prove to you right now that the bread in the bread aisle is not okay. And here we go. You go to the bakery, if it's still open, and you get a loaf of bread. How soon before it stales? 2 days? 3, maybe? Okay, you buy a loaf of bread in the grocery store aisle. How soon before it stales?
Lasts a long time.
3 weeks. How come? They're both bread. The answer is the added sugar. Sugar's been added to the grocery store bread. And the reason is not because necessarily to make it sweet. The reason is because sugar is a humectant. It holds on to water. It is hygroscopic. It holds on to water. So when you bake the bread, the sugar doesn't evaporate off, but it holds water molecules in during the baking process. And so the bread stays moist and spongy for a lot longer. So the food industry can include a sell-by date that is, much further down the line. Decreases depreciation, increases profits. It was put there for their purposes, not for yours.
Well,
so, grocery store bread's a problem.
Okay, let me ask you a quick question about that, because when I wrote about this before, because I do think that, processed carbohydrates are a problem for us. It's basically like sugar, right?
Yep.
Eating processed carbs.
Well, they're glucose. They're glucose, not fructose. But
okay.
Glucose still generates an insulin response. So they're still driving chronic metabolic disease, just in a different way.
So I heard from all the bakers in America who told me that yeast needs sugar to do its thing.
Well,
and
it's true that
sugar consumed by the yeast, so I'm not actually eating the sugar.
So it is true that yeast needs sugar to proof. That's true. So you proof the yeast in a little measuring cup of sugar, and then you add that after it's been proofed to the rest of the dough. And then it works, and that's fine. And then you haven't had much sugar because the yeast has basically turned the sugar into alcohol itself as it's grown. The point is, that's not what they're doing. They're adding the sugar to the dough with the yeast. And so they had to add a whole lot more. So that's actually not correct. The difference is that what they should be doing is a two-step process, but because they're doing it in processed fashion, they're doing it in a one-step process. And so they're actually adding sugar to the dough, and that is a problem because the sugars are humectant. Yes, the yeast does need sugar to proof, but the bread doesn't need sugar to proof.
Okay, I'm glad you answered that because I got blasted by the bakers, and I don't know enough about baking, so so now we've cleared that up. So thank you. We're getting
you learn a lot about food science in this business.
Exactly. That's why we like to talk to you. We're getting a lot of questions. I get this a lot too when I talk about cutting sugar and cutting processed food. This is a lot to try to change at once, people say. Is there one thing people can do now to help them start eating fewer processed foods? Is there a first step? Like, how do you start? Because it does feel like a big lift to just say overnight, I'm going to change everything.
Right. The first step is drop the sugar. Don't worry about the rest of the processed foods in the store. Okay, just drop the sugar. Okay, and the problem is that if you've gone into the aisles, the chances that any given processed food product that you picked up has added sugar. So it means, for the time being, it means reading labels. And it means reading the back of the label, which is a problem because a lot of times it's hidden. I personally think it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food. And that's what my new book is really talking about. The title of this book, it will be coming out in the spring, is Metabolical: The Lure and the Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. And what I do in that book is I explain how one navigates the grocery store, how one understands what's been done to our food so that you can undo it. If you get rid of the sugar, you will start losing weight, you will start feeling better, and then it will become much easier for you to be able to go fully into changing your diet and looking for real food.
So what should we look for on the label because some foods have their own, milk has some sugar in it naturally. Some foods just have sugar because nature puts it there. Right. How do you find added sugar, and what is the amount that you want to limit yourself to every day?
So the good news is that some of the food companies have added a line for added sugar on the label, but it's not a mandate yet. It was supposed to be a mandate under the Obama administration's FDA, but then the Trump administration's FDA rolled that back. But some manufacturers have decided to just go ahead and do it because they realize it's the right thing to do. So the first thing to do is look for added sugar on the label, not total sugars, but added sugar. If that's not there, then the next thing to do is look at the ingredients list. If any form of sugar, and remember, there are 56 names for sugar, and they use all of them very specifically to confuse you. But if there's any sugar that's any one of the first three ingredients, that's dessert. Put it back.
Okay. What about, so first three ingredients, if there's sugar there or any kind of sugar product, don't buy it.
Don't buy it.
Look at how much added sugar. If I have a yogurt that has, what is like a lot of added sugar versus a little bit of added sugar, or do you want no added sugar?
So plain yogurt has 7 grams of sugar, all lactose, and lactose is fine. There's nothing wrong with plain yogurt. A strawberry yogurt has anywhere from 16 to 23 grams of sugar. So it's an increase of 11 to 16 grams. Now, that's the problem.
Right.
So what you should do is buy the plain yogurt and add your own whole fruit to it and mix it in. That's what the Europeans do. That's what we should do. Only in America is frozen yogurt dessert. Okay, that's what you have to remember. Frozen yogurt is not yogurt. Frozen yogurt is dessert.
is dessert. Do you have a hit list? Do you have top foods that you think are causing most of the problem that people can sort of just be super aware of, not to put in their shopping cart?
Yes, absolutely. And they're on my website, robertlustig.com. Okay, the dirty dozen, if you will. I mean, we always talk about the dirty dozen in terms of the pesticides, but it's also the added sugar. So people need to know what to look for. Ultimately, we can do this. And the great thing about the food industry, the great thing is they don't care what they sell, just as long as they sell.
Right.
If you vote with your feet, and we could actually have a cultural tectonic shift in this country of basically saying, we're tired of being sick. We want to be healthy. We're going to, limit our sugar consumption. The food industry would respond because they just want to sell. They've told us so.
So can you give us a few of the items on that dirty dozen? Do you recall what they are? I'm sorry.
My head, yeah. I got to look at it.
I think like granola bars, cereal.
Oh yeah, all cereal. Watch out for cereal. Yes, granola is a disaster. That is like number one.
Yeah.
And pretty much any breakfast cereal is going to be a problem.
Yeah,
there are a few breakfast cereals that toe the line.
I know, and we've talked about, so obviously juices are a problem. Granola cereals, I think yogurts have a lot of added sugar.
Salad dressing.
Salad dressing, okay.
Salad dressing, make your own salad dressing. It's not hard.
This is such a great conversation, and I know there's so much interest. So tell people so they can go to your website, which is what?
robertlustig.com. Also, our nonprofit is called eatreal.org, and we are basically working with school districts around the country to get the processed food out of kids' schools. In the Contra Costa County, in Mount Diablo Unified School District, we got rid of 270,000 pounds of sugar in 1 year in one school district, just by getting real food into the school cafeterias.
And then how do we find you on Twitter?
Twitter is at Robert Lustig MD.
And if I want to read about this, which book that you have out now would you recommend?
So Fat Chance is about diet and physical health. The Hacking of the American Mind is about diet and behavioral health, addiction and depression.
Okay.
They're both relevant.
So check those out on Amazon. And the new book is coming out?
Spring, probably May 2021. It's a Harper Wave, a division of HarperCollins, and it's Metabolical, the Lure and the Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine.
And when that publishes, I'll definitely share it with readers, and maybe we can have you back to talk about that book. I also want to remind readers that Dr. Lustig helped me create at the beginning of the year. I wrote a column called Make 2020 the Year of Less Sugar, and we created the 7-day sugar challenge. And working together came up with 7 steps that you'll get an email every day that will sort of guide you and help you cut back on processed foods and help you reimagine breakfast. And it'll give you kind of a way to start cutting sugar. I took the challenge and it made a huge difference for me. During the pandemic, it's been a little more challenging just because life is more challenging, but I think it's something that everybody can still do, even if you can't find certain things in the grocery store shelves. So what do you want to leave us with? How should we go forward from this talk? What should be the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up? What should I be thinking about to start my day to get on this path?
So the first thing you should do when you wake up in the morning, is not look at the scale.
Okay.
There's a whole bunch of people who think looking at the scale is a good idea. Weight is not the issue. Your metabolic health is the issue, and you cannot learn that from standing on the scale. It's the fat that you can't see that matters. What you care about is your waist circumference. What you care about is your belt size. Don't stand on the scale. Look at your belt size. If your belt size is an issue, that means you need to be, just that much more committed to your metabolic health. 88% of Americans are metabolically ill, and that is way more people than are obese.
Right.
And that's because thin people get sick too. So at 88%, you ought to assume you're sick unless told otherwise by your doctor. And your doctor can figure it out with some lab tests and based on your belt size. Do not worry about the weight. The weight is not the issue. It's the liver fat, and it's the visceral fat that matters. That's what causes metabolic disease.
All right, so try going for a protein breakfast, cut the sugar, focus on your metabolic health. And if you guys have any other questions that we didn't get answered, feel free to send them to me at tpp@nytimes.com. I'll talk to Dr. Lustig later and maybe write a column and answer some of your questions. So I'm happy to answer them for you. Also sign up for the Well newsletter at nytimes.com/newsletters/well. And to find out more about our full slate of digital events, please visit timesevents.nytimes.com. There's something for everyone. It's all free, so check it out. This event will probably be back in about a month. I think we're going to be back in August, so taking a little break, but we'll be back with more great information. And so, Dr. Lustig, thank you so much. I always learn so much when I talk to you, and I can't wait for your new book.
Tara, it's my pleasure. I hope this book will be a guide for the public. I hope it'll be a textbook for the clinicians. I hope it'll be a science treatise for the scientists, and I hope it'll be a policy directive for the politicians.
And I love
we'll look at it.
I love the title because it is a bit diabolical what the food companies have done to our food supply. So metabolical, I hope everybody checks it out. I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Tara. My pleasure.
And finally, we want to give a special thank you to all of our subscribers. You make our work possible. We look forward to speaking with all of you again. See you in August. Thank you. Stay safe.